Q3 1947, 400 million people on the Indian subcontinent are about to gain independence, and the British Empire will be reduced to 1/3 of its population. As momentous as the beginning of the end of the biggest empire in known history is, it is the sectarian conflicts inside the British Raj that will have the more lasting effect. Ethnic fires of passion that the European colonial masters have fanned and fueled for over a century and will now morph a dream of freedom into a nightmare of division. Violence will pit neighbor against neighbor in one of the most brutal chapters of the post-war world, setting the stage for a state of war within the Cold War and eventually leading to a nuclear standoff that will last into a new millennium. I'm Spartacus Olsson, and welcome to Season 1 of TimeGhost Cold War coverage in our series War to War, where we follow the wars that wouldn't end within a Cold World War, the beginning of the digital age, the atomic age, and the space age, when we began to replicate our minds electronically, gained the power to end our very existence as a species, and discovered that we can truly reach for the stars. In one of our earlier episodes in this series, Sebastian touched on the story of British India, the Raj, as the clamor for independence grows louder and louder during and immediately after the Second World War. We also saw that this isn't a simple case of conflict and negotiations between Indian independence activists and the British. In fact, this is a tripartite affair, with India increasingly split on ethno-religious lines. On the one side, we have the secular party, the Indian National Congress, who favor a united India for Hindus, Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, and all other faiths. On the other, we have the Muslim League, who feel that India's Muslims will never have equal rights in a state that has an overwhelming Hindu majority. They favor independence on their own terms and the creation of a separate Muslim state called Pakistan. Today, we will continue the story as the Muslim League gets their wish and the Indian subcontinent is partitioned into two states. Let's start by looking at where this idea of dividing India came from in the first place and how it gained momentum. For that, we'll have to go back far further than the Second World War. For millennia, the subcontinent has been a crucible of faiths. In the 8th century, Islam arrives in India, building the Delhi Sultanate and the Mughal Empire. Yet India never truly becomes a Muslim land. Most people are already Hindu, and there are significant minorities of Buddhists and Jains, but Muslim rulers and culture becomes deeply rooted. Christianity and then Sikhism add further colors to the vibrant tapestry of India. Starting in the mid-18th century and cemented in the following 100 years comes British rule, a seemingly secular power that does something transformative. They begin counting people by religion, subtly shifting belonging from feudal to sectarian. Suddenly, faith becomes a primary label, and stories of the past are reforged, emphasizing difference rather than commonality. Hindus are spread across the heartland, with Muslims concentrated in the northwest and northeast wings. Sikhs are anchored in the Punjab, with Christians in distinct pockets and Buddhists and others scattered throughout. Crucially, the communities themselves begin to define and defend their religious identities as never before. Many Muslim political and intellectual figures begin to see the vastly more populous Hindu majority as a threat. They believe that when or if Britain grants independence to India, the Hindus would inevitably have the lion's share of power and use this to oppress them. In 1888, Sayyid Ahmad Khan lays out the basics of the argument. He becomes the father of the two nations theory, the idea that India's Hindus and Muslims are distinct peoples. Now suppose that all English and the whole English army were to leave India, taking with them all their cannon and their splendid weapons and everything. Then who would be rulers of India? Is it possible that under these circumstances, two nations, the Mohammedans, Muslims, and the Hindus, could sit on the same throne and remain equal in power? Most certainly not. It is necessary that one of them should conquer the other and thrust it down. To hope that both could remain equal is to desire the impossible and the inconceivable. It was these sorts of ideas that inspire the founders of the All India Muslim League in 1906. At first, the League argues not for the complete separation of India's Muslims, but rather for greater protection and autonomy within an independent India. But the notion of Muslims and Hindus as separate and competing people is only strengthened as British reforms open up opportunities, albeit limited, for Indian participation in the governance of the Raj. The Morley-Minto reform of 1909 introduces a clear separation between Hindu and Muslim voters in the principal legislatures. One portentous innovation was the inauguration for the first time in the provincial and central legislative bodies of separate electorates in which only Muslims could vote and reserved seats in the councils for Muslims. This provision implied that only a Muslim could represent Muslims or protect Muslim interests, a presumption that would shape political life in India for decades to come. At the time, Congress opposes the idea of separate electorates on the grounds that it would undermine India's secular future. But the Congress will drop this opposition after the Great War in return for the League's signing of the 1916 Lucknow Pact, in which the two parties make a set of joint demands for constitutional reform to the British. The pact is presented as a symbol of Hindu-Muslim unity for the nationalist cause and is a victory for men like Muhammad Ali Jinnah, one of the leading Muslim members of the Congress Party. But the very existence of separate electorates, which are further extended to Sikhs, Christians, and Anglo-Indians, only encourages Hindus and Muslims to think of themselves as two distinct nations. The rupture isn't immediate, and in the early 1920s, the League and Congress find common cause in the so-called Caliphate movement. To cut a very long story short, this is a joint campaign by both groups in support of the preservation of the Ottoman Empire. The two sides have different motivations, though. For India's Muslims, the Sultan is the Khalifa, or spiritual head of the global Muslim community, while for Congress, this is simply another chance to oppose British imperial policy. But when the Turks themselves abolished the Ottoman Empire in 1924, the temporary unifying cause is gone and communal tensions well up again. Soon, the president of the Muslim League, Muhammad Iqbal, is going further than before. In 1930, he delivers a speech at the League's annual assembly, in which he advocates the formation of an independent Muslim state comprising the Muslim-majority provinces of northwest India. 3 years later, the London-based activist Chaudhry Rahmat Ali gives a name to this state, Pakistan, which is an acronym based on the names of the provinces of Punjab, P, Northwest Frontier Province or Afghania, A, Kashmir, K, Sindh, S, and Baluchistan, Stan. Throughout this period, the Indian National Congress remained committed to the ideal of a unified and secular India, but the rise of assertive Hindu leaders and the emphasis on Hindu traditions in some nationalist discourse ends up alienating some Muslims. Some of the more forceful rhetoric from the party includes proposals for banning the slaughtering of cows, which are considered sacred in Hinduism, and making Hindi the sole national language. All of this adds to Muslim fears. In 1934, Muhammad Ali Jinnah returns to India, determined to reshape the Raj to his wishes. Since the day of the Lucknow Pact, Jinnah's politics have transformed. In short, he has left Congress, spent time in Britain, and is then persuaded to return and take charge of the League. Shortly afterwards, the 1935 Government of India Act vastly expands the Indian franchise from 5 million to 35 million, gives more autonomy to the Indian provinces, and sets the path towards an Indian federation. Provincial elections are set for the winter of 1936-37, and Jinnah sets out to make the League a powerful electoral force. In the end, despite Jinnah's efforts, the Muslim League makes little progress with Muslim voters. Sure, Congress takes only 6% of the Muslim vote, but the League only wins 25%, with the vast majority, 69%, going to various other provincial Muslim parties. But paradoxically, the very scale of Congress's dominance begins to undermine their own ambitions for a united India. Buoyed by their strong showing, they turned down offers from Muslim League politicians to enter into coalition government in the United Provinces. With its overwhelming strength in the Hindu-majority provinces, the Congress did not need the League as a coalition partner there. In the Muslim-majority provinces, the League also had to remain in opposition. With the benefit of hindsight, one can state that it would have been an act of wise statesmanship if Congress had, nevertheless, established coalition governments with the League, thus helping Jinnah to remain what he had been up to this point, a nationalist spokesman for the Muslims in the Muslim minority provinces. Instead, Jinnah's previously fairly moderate position moves closer to the more extreme position of men like Chaudhry Rahmat Ali. At the Lahore session of the League in March 1940, Jinnah gives a speech where he advocates for Pakistan in all but name. His words echo those of Sayyid Ahmad Khan over 50 years earlier. The problem in India is not of an intercommunal character, but manifestly of an international one, and it must be treated as such. Muslims, are not a minority as it is commonly known and understood. One has only to look around. Muslims are a nation according to any definition of a nation, and they must have their homelands, their territory, and their state. Jinnah also has what we might call a good war. After Viceroy Linlithgow declares war on Germany without consultation, the Indian National Congress announces an immediate boycott of provincial government. In contrast, the League takes a broadly supportive position towards the British war effort. Britain then imprisons much of the Congress leadership, including Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru, after the Quit India protest movement descends into violence in August 1942. The removal of Congress as a legitimate force leaves the League in far stronger standing. Jinnah uses this time to continue the independence dialogue with the British and to strengthen his party's claim to be the sole representative of Indian Muslims. As Jinnah puts it, the war that nobody had wanted turned out to be a blessing in disguise. After the end of the Second World War, the new Labour government in Britain recognizes that Indian independence is inevitable. But how will they leave? And to whom will they leave the country? At the Simla Conference of June 1945, Viceroy Archie Wavell convenes Indian leaders to try and put together an executive council composed of Indians. The Congress Party, led by, among others, Nehru, tentatively agrees to participate. But Jinnah fears a united India will simply bury Muslim political aspirations. He makes a bold, uncompromising demand. The Muslim League alone must select all Muslim members of any interim government. This is a red line for Congress, and the two sides are deadlocked. Jinnah's stature now rises further as he has proven that nothing in India can move forward without his consent. Then come the provincial elections of winter 46 to 47. The results are stark. Congress sweeps Hindu-majority areas while the Muslim League emerges as the overwhelmingly dominant force in Muslim-majority regions, fracturing the country geographically. The British, desperate to find a solution, dispatched the high-powered cabinet mission in 1946. Their plan is a complex, three-tiered federation designed to appease all sides. Intriguingly, Jinnah for a moment seems to soften his demands, but in the end, Congress and the League are locked in mutual suspicion and can't agree on the details. Convinced that negotiations are futile, Jinnah then unleashes Direct Action Day on August 16, 1946. It is intended as a show of Muslim strength, but it becomes a bloodbath. Calcutta erupts in a frenzy of communal violence, the Great Calcutta Killing as Muslim mobs urged on by the Chief Minister of Bengal attack Hindus. The Hindus fight back, and in no time at all, somewhere between 4,000 and 10,000 people are dead. It's clear that the British are struggling to maintain order in India. The economic outlook at home is bleak, and they still have plenty of other commitments elsewhere as the aftermath of the World War turns into the Cold War. So, Prime Minister Clement Attlee and his government are resolved to get out as fast as possible. The British put together an interim government a month or so later with Nehru in charge. The Muslim League refuses to join at first, but they eventually relent. Attlee sends Lord Louis Mountbatten out to be the final Viceroy of India, arriving in March 1947. He is sent to manage the transfer of power, but he quickly sees that unity is no longer an option. Even Nehru, a lifelong champion of a united India, finally reluctantly concedes. In June 1947, Mountbatten announces the partition plan. British India will be torn apart into India and Pakistan. The deadline just 10 weeks away on August 15, 1947. After decades of struggle, Indian independence is finally, undeniably, on the horizon. But the price? Division and violence. Carving up a religiously mixed subcontinent is no easy task, especially when these religious fault lines cut right through the middle of provinces. Desperate to leave as soon as possible, the British take a hatchet to the jewel of the empire and produce a messy settlement that satisfies nobody. Here's how the axe falls. Pakistan will be formed of two entities. The first is West Pakistan. This comprises the Muslim-majority northwestern provinces of Balochistan, northwestern frontier province, and Sindh. Punjab province will be split down the middle, with the Muslim-majority west going to Pakistan and the Hindu-Sikh majority east going to India. Likewise, far off in the east, the province of Bengal will be split, with East Bengal becoming East Pakistan and the rest of the province joining India. Then, on August 15, 1947, comes Indian Independence Day. On the eve of freedom, newly appointed Prime Minister Nehru speaks of the new hope for the subcontinent. But it is already too late. Since at least March 1947, ethnic tensions have been bubbling over. Punjab, in particular, is a tinderbox. Religious communities are interwoven, and the partition has unleashed resentments, anxieties, and a furious sense of betrayal. In West Punjab, Muslims expelled their Hindu and Sikh neighbours who flee east. In East Punjab, the reverse happens. As this human tide surges across hastily drawn borders, the very darkest aspects of human nature are unleashed with looting, violence, murder, rape, and massacres. The initial outbreak in March 1947 took place in the Muslim-majority West Punjab as Muslims attacked Hindu and Sikh residents. As independence neared, the violence spread through the province and caught up all communities, especially the Sikhs, who saw their community with its lands and shrines sliced in two. A highly militarized society, long the recruiting ground for the Indian Army, with 1/3 of its eligible males having served in the war, the Punjab in 1947 contained vast numbers of demobilized soldiers. Many of these were Sikhs who, as those who had lost the most from partition, took advantage of their military training and knowledge of modern weaponry to organize and direct attacks in methodical and systematic fashion on villages, trains, and refugee columns. If you've followed the stories of human misery I've covered over the past few years, you'll know that the bookkeeping of suffering is extraordinarily difficult. Things are no different here. Somewhere between 12 and 20 million people are displaced, while estimates of the death toll ranges from at least 200,000 all the way up to 1 million, and perhaps even up to 2 million. This story is far from over, and soon a new flashpoint emerges. As well as India and Pakistan, the former British Raj had compromised hundreds of princely states ruled over by Indian princes allied to the British crown. Covering an area greater than that of Great Britain itself, Jammu and Kashmir is one of the largest and most privileged princely states. The Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir, Hari Singh, has a choice to make. He can either join India or Pakistan, or remain neutral and independent. Of all the options, Singh favors neutrality. But Singh really doesn't have much of a choice. He is a Hindu prince ruling over a state that borders both India and Pakistan, and his 4 million people are split along religious lines, with 60% being Muslim and 40% Hindu. Whether he likes it or not, he's involved in this battle simply by virtue of demographics and geography. As Hindu and Sikh refugees arrive, bringing tales of the violence they suffered at Muslim hands, there are soon retaliatory attacks on the state's Muslims. This brings counterattacks, and once again there is a descent into tit-for-tat atrocities. By the end of October, things have boiled over. The Pakistani state provides support to armed rebels, and the Maharaja appeals to India for help. By early 1948, Indian and Pakistani troops are clashing with one another. Given the abrupt severing of the British Raj, this Indo-Pakistani war is a strange affair, to say the least. Lord Mountbatten stays on as Governor-General of India, finding himself at war with Jinnah, now Governor-General of Pakistan. Increasing the absurdity of the situation, both sides choose British officers as commanders-in-chief of their armies, Rob Lockhart for the Indians and Frank Mazervi for the Pakistanis. The two men will maintain daily telephone contact throughout the war. We will see how that strange situation develops when we return to the subcontinent, where hopes of independence are being drowned in the bloodshed of renewed war. A war between two new nations that will become chess pieces in the Cold War machinations between three nuclear superpowers and eventually lead to a crack in the attempts to put the atomic genie back into the bottle by curtailing nuclear proliferation. A sectarian conflict that will have life and death consequences for hundreds of millions who depend on free access to the great water resources springing out of the mighty Himalayan mountains. A religious division that will transcend the Cold War and have material impact on an asymmetric war between religious forces using terrorism and the Western secular powers in our own time. A struggle of us versus them, born out of the childish idea that you are not like me and we can never reconcile. A product of identity politics, colonial arrogance, and fear. In our next episode, we will look at the secret wars within all these conflicts as Astrid and Anna take us into a new age of espionage. It is the TimeGhost Army that makes this series possible. So join the army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com and become a part of building a comprehensive collection of world history to learn from our mistakes and successes and help build a better future. For more on the story of Indian independence, you can click here for our coverage of the 1930s and Gandhi's Salt March. Thanks for watching. Excelsior!